This is Dr. Lawrence Jones with a Milk Market Tidbit on the Dairy Products Report for January that was just released yesterday. And I'm recording this on Saturday, March 4th, 2023. So we got the Dairy Products Report, and some people will argue that this is not a market mover. It's always kind of a ho-hum kind of report. But for me, it actually puts things into perspective, particularly because the industry is very poor at doing a good job of estimating demand. And so this kind of gives us an idea. So kind of here are the highlights. One of the big things I'm going to cover is that we're up 3.2% over a year ago. Now, what was interesting is it gets broken down into Italian type cheeses, American type cheeses, and these actually had exactly the same amount of production. And you can see that American was up 6.2, whereas the Italian was down just a little bit. So there was definitely a change in composition of cheese. And if we look at this, this is always interesting to people because this is the pounds of cheese made each month. And the Italian type cheeses are the largest percentage of cheese actually made, and it's very similar to the American. And cheddar, which is the one that we're actually paid on for the National Dairy Sales Report, is much lower. And so we can kind of see there have been a little bit of changing of the guard here in the last month because it looks like the American cheeses came up and the Italian cheeses came down a little bit and cheddar came up a little bit. And so that's probably what's driving a little bit more cheddar coming to the spot market. Now, one of the things I want to warn you about, and I'm not trying to throw anybody particularly under the bus because I've seen this in numerous different things, is that we look at this and headlines as cheddar output surges. And here is the January 2023, and it is definitely high, but we've had an increase of 3.2% over a year ago. Now, I want to remind everybody what cow numbers look like. And this was a year ago. We had 9,367,000. And this January, we had 9,405,000. So it's about 40,000 more cows. And so if you have 40,000 more cows, wouldn't you expect more cheese to be made? And in fact, that's how I look at this. This is why I just absolutely do not like year over year comparisons, because this would suggest here that, cheese is really high in January, but in fact, it just followed cow numbers. So let's look at the amount of cheese we get per 100 pounds of milk. It's kind of a ratio that I started building and following. And it turns out that this January was right on trend line from all these other Januaries. And so what that said is that about 62% of the milk probably went into cheese. And so absolutely no surprise here. And the other thing is you can see that this generally is coming down in January, and so that came down just a little bit for this January. Now, what this report does is allows me now to calculate what I call my rolling cheese disappearance. And so this is a 12-month rolling where the black line is the production and the blue line is the disappearance. And then what I do is I calculate for the last 12 months, what did we have as a disappearance? About 38,320,000 pounds of cheese. Now, so let's see where we were in this January. So here's our 38,320,000. Now that is kind of an average of 6 months ago because that's a 12-month rolling average. So let's bring that up to this January, and we're going to use the slope of the line. So we're going to add, 6 times 48 pounds per month. So that's 38,608,000 pounds per day. And what did we produce? We produced 39 million. Very similar. So I would argue that our cheese production across all different types is very similar to our cheese demand. And the other thing is, when you go and calculate, across the last 12 months, what it was going to take to make that kind of demand, we need 9,419,000 cows. And what do we have? Let's go back and look. We have 9,405,000. So this again would tell us that the cow numbers that we have is just about exactly right for the cheese demand that we're seeing. So now let's look at butter because butter, came up a little bit in terms of production. And so this is the percentage of fat used for butter. And what I do is take butter and multiply it by 0.805 or something like that because that's how much fat is in butter. So then we can say if we made this much butter that represented this much fat and how much fat we have. And again, we were right on trend line. I mean, right consistent where we were, usually every January this number comes up because we take a lot of fat, we put it in the butter. Again, we're not making ice cream now, we're not making some other products now for the holidays, and so this is the time of year that we take and make as much butter as we can. So again, nothing surprising here at all. And so my basic assumption of this is if we have this amount of production, 19,300,000 pounds of milk, we're going to know how much cheese we should have produced and how much butter we're going to produce. And that came in right in line with those kind of estimates. Now, the reason I think this is a bit bullish for the market is in January, we took cheese out of cold storage. And one of the things I keep in mind is that given the cold storage report, because that always comes out about the 22nd, anytime you have more production, that means you must have had more demand. Because if you made more, but it didn't show up in cold storage, then demand must have been good. So right now, I would suggest that demand is actually holding up fairly steady. Cheese production in January was the same as in December. So if we end up taking cheese out of cold storage again in February, that's going to be, another indication of good demand. All right, so this next week we're going to kind of start into March. We got a global dairy trade auction on Tuesday. We get the first national dairy sales report on Wednesday with the WASDE crop reports also on Wednesday, which should be a big day for crops.